So, if you've been paying attention lately, whether you've been watching the news or on social media or whatever platform it is that provides you information, you may have been coming across words such as geopolitics, multipolarity, seeing phrases like a new world order. In fact, I believe in a speech relatively recently, Joe Biden said the exact phrase and it sparked an outcry on social media, among other things. And what I would like to do in this video is try my very best from my own perspective to explain the events that are currently happening, the shifts that we are currently seeing, to see if we can better understand this current moment and where it will eventually take us. And what I would like to do is I would like to start at what I believe to be is the center of everything that's happening right now, which is the ongoing crisis between Russia and Ukraine. And I would like to begin from my own proposed beginning, which is the initial or right before the initial invasion of Ukraine. So what we had was this mass buildup around its borders. And what was going on is you had powerful US leaders basically saying to Vladimir Putin, threatening, if you invade Ukraine, you will face dire consequences. There will be punishment for this. Do not do it. It didn't work. None of it worked. Obviously, it didn't because Putin invaded Ukraine. And not only that, but you have to think about it for a second. Putin had to know that punishment was coming regardless. If you think back to the Crimea situation, this is nothing new for them, but for some reason he felt confident enough to embark on this adventure, knowing the punishments and the everything else that would come with it. Well, enter China. China is the largest economy after the United States. China is, as many would say, on the ascend. And what we've been seeing from the United States is this economic warfare, in the West in general, is this economic warfare basically targeted at imploding the Russian economy. And when it comes to China and their ties with Russia, they are the closest that they've ever been. And as long as China exists, the Russian economy will remain on its feet and they will avoid any kind of embargoes imposed on them from the US and the West in general. And so what we had also relatively recently was Joe Biden having a call with the Chinese leader, the Chinese president, Xi Jinping. And essentially what unfolded during this call, as I can best understand it, is Biden essentially did the same thing he did with Putin before the initial invasion of Ukraine, which is throw out threats, warnings. If you lend aid, whether it be financial or military, to Russia, you will face dire consequences. I am warning you, don't do this or there will be repercussions. Did China thrust away any support for the Russian regime or Vladimir Putin? No. Did they change their course at all, even a little bit? No. Did they say things that previously they maybe wouldn't have said? No. Everything remained the exact same as it has been, with China expressing empathy and lots of sincerity for what they believe to be legitimate and sincere grievances of Vladimir Putin and the Russian regime and their security concerns and everything else. So nothing changed there. Once again, threats and warnings doled out from American leaders, and they landed very hollow on their directed targets or their intended targets. In fact, one could argue that this entire conflict has brought Russia and China together more than they've ever been. Because, I mean, when you impose these kinds of sanctions, this kind of economic warfare against a population, all it does is it straightens their backs. They become even more hardline than they already were. And you create an even bigger problem. But that's an entirely different conversation. But most importantly, probably most importantly, the center of growth for capitalism has moved. This is a common trend within this economic system. The center of growth for capitalism is no longer in the United States of America. It is in other places, one of those places being, and probably most notably, the People's Republic of China. And China is on an expedition currently with their Belt and Road Initiative, expanding their power throughout Africa, throughout the Eurasian landmass, with their Belt and Road Initiative, building roads, pipelines, technologies, all other things in these particular areas, expanding their power, and you're starting to see a break in U.S. global hegemony, especially one of the most notable stories with Saudi Arabia and the Chinese and the oil sales, the devaluing of the dollar, turning towards the Chinese currency. I mean, these are all things that are building up to take us to a moment that I don't believe a lot of U.S. leaders are prepared for. And it's this break in U.S. control. As I just said earlier, the warnings to Vladimir Putin not to invade Ukraine didn't work. The warnings and the threats to the Chinese to stop their continued support for Vladimir Putin and his Russian regime didn't work. A lot of things aren't working for the U.S. at the moment. And it seems like these other world leaders, these other nations are feeling much more emboldened than they may have previously. And you have to ask yourself why. And that why has to be dealt with. And the way that I see it right now in our country is that it isn't being dealt with, one, because a lot of our world leaders just don't see it and they simply don't understand it. And for the ones that do see it, they don't want to deal with it in the way that it should actually be dealt with. Okay? China is, as many would say, and as I've said in this video, on the ascend. The US, however, is on the descend. And this is nothing new. We've seen this happen before. We saw it happen in a situation that we were actually involved in, we as in America. We liberated ourselves from the British. There was a big war where this entire ordeal was fought over. You might remember it. It was in 1775, 76. And we were therefore freed. Well, the British didn't take too light to that. They wanted what they had back. And then you got the War of 1812. It was by no means a peaceful transition from under the control of another, but nevertheless, it happened. We prevailed, and everything else quite literally was history. And what you're seeing is kind of sort of the same. You're seeing a major power on the decline and another major power on the ascend. And we're kind of at a point where we're looking at this and we're wondering how it's going to shake out. And the best way that it can, at the very least in my eyes, is for the power on the descend to deal with that and to recognize where it is and to make sure that this ride down isn't as turbulent as it could be. And we all know very well throughout history, if you're aware, powers that are descending tend to try to stop their descent through militarism and other means. And we're kind of seeing remnants of that already. And yes, it is indeed very frightening, and it really spells out a grim future. But overall, look, it's no secret. Russia and China are feeling emboldened because history quite literally gives them the right to be. China has, as I alluded, expanded their power in Europe and Asia, across Africa, and they are becoming a more powerful global power. And no more will the threats, will the warnings from the U.S. deter not only China, not only Russia, but many other states from doing things that we otherwise don't want them to do. And in order for us to move forward, we have to realize that we are no longer in the position that we once were. And the quicker we realize that, the better.